Batu, Marana, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing great. My face hurts a little, but how are you doing?
Yes, I'm not too bad. Not too bad. I say it's. I've gone through some experimental surgery, and I feel I'm looking 10 years younger. Today
we both need it.
Yeah, especially at the moment. Yeah, I'm feeling my age in about 10 more. But today we're going to be going. We're starting our full season 3 sprint. We've done the 50s block, and now we are into sort of. I don't want to say the main bunch, but we're sort of starting that sort of like the other decades. We're not going too far to begin with. To be perfectly honest, we're going from 1959 to 1960, but we are going across the ocean and across the continents. We're going to go to Europe, and we're going to be doing Les Yeux sans visage, or Eyes Without a Face, from 1960. I tried then. I'm hoping it was okay.
Yeah, not bad.
Not
Les
bad.
Yeux sans visage.
Yeah, I'll take not bad. I'll take that. That's all right. I got a D in French when I was at school. I literally got shouted at by my French teacher after an exam because I clearly hadn't done any revision. And
I bombed out of French in high school. I did maybe like 8 hours of homework in 4 years of high school. And so French was the one subject that I could not do well without any studying. And I made it sort of like to the end of the second year. And I think I went from like A, then to B and C. And I thought, this is just going to get worse. I got to get out while they're getting good. But then I went back and studied it in college just because it was the one thing that I cared about that I was not good at,
Well, you are, and as you've sort of, I think maybe on the show, you're. Would you describe yourself as fluent at a push, or?
I hate the term fluent. I mean, I can because my sort of foster son has lived in France, and his accent is way better than mine. His vocabulary is way better than mine. He will pop out phrases that it's like, I guess they say that on the street. Like, I've never heard of this, but I understand the grammar way better than he does. And I can stop and say, oh, no, that accent's that way because of this. And that word comes from this. And so it's a difference between book learning versus experience. But I have a master's in French, so.
Yeah, more than I've got. I barely have a GCSE in French. And I think when I was a kid, I sort of suffered from the usual small islander syndrome of screw them, I shall just speak British louder and slower. It doesn't work, I found over the years.
See, we suffer from big nation syndrome, where we have less fluency in other languages than almost anywhere else in the world.
It's an old relationship we have with the French. We really do. But I will say, and I'm going to give this sort of a heads up, I really enjoyed this film. I really enjoyed it. I thought it's a beautiful film to begin with. But yeah, that's it. We should start talking a little bit. I'll give it a little bit of a synopsis, because also as well, I will say to anyone following along, you may have to find this in certain ways to be able to watch it if you want to watch it online. It was quite difficult to find for me. I've actually got the BFI Blu-ray, which I'm really glad I did because the special features are really cool as well. But the story is of a young woman, Christiane, who suffered in a car accident. Her face was disfigured, and her father, who is a experimental plastic surgeon or a general doctor, scientist, I think, really, from the 60s, is trying to progress this idea of facial replacement surgery, and is basically kidnapping and killing young women to take their faces and put it on his daughter. Eventually, though, it all goes a bit pear-shaped, and she wanders off into the night. What I would say is the one disappointment after seeing a bit of this is, well, no, actually, I'm going to go one step further than the disappointment. I now see this as a prequel. This is a prequel film to Face Off. This film is this is the prequel to Nick Cage and John Travolta. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it's funny how influential this is. I mean, there's the Billy Idol song. I thought about Face Off too. I thought, like, even though, like, when they were producing it, they tried to steer away from the novels Mad Scientist. I couldn't stop thinking, like, this is such a French version of Frankenstein, right? Like, this is like, instead of Igor, it's a beautiful assistant, and he's focused, his monster is his daughter, and this obsession with beauty. And it touched me. Also, I'm a big fan of Nip Tuck, and it touched me on, sort of our obsession with beauty. And the film is very poetic in its shots and very French in its, decor and focus on sort of young, beautiful female women.
Yeah, well, one of the things I thought was really interesting from the offset is that, this aesthetic point to it, this aesthetic of even her mask. Is I mean, it's clearly been taken as just a mold of her face, and then that's been turned into this mask. But it's very plain, and it has this effect of being very creepy because of that plainness. But it's still like this. It's like a porcelain doll, and there's this notion, to me, I get this thing of dolls, and his daughter is no more than a plaything to, not plaything's probably the wrong word, but, like, yes, he wants to transform her face, but is it really for a fatherly love, or is it like, oh no, I've got this captive test subject that I can keep going back to? So it's an interesting sort of, it surprised me, this film did, it really did.
Well, she compares herself to the dogs. And you see doves at the end that apparently he's been performing experiments on. And these are sort of dogs that are found in the woods, and they capture them. And, he, I guess, does experiments on them. And she's kind to them, and they're kind to her. But, spoilers, you find out that at the end, the German Shepherd, which back in those days was considered the most violent, uncontrollable dog. That's like a pit bull today, with the stereotypes that people have. German Shepherds used to be like the pit bulls that, it was like, you got to avoid this German Shepherds, man. They will kill your children. And a German Shepherd mauls the doctor's face and kills him. I mean, she makes that equation. I don't know. I mean, he seems obsessed. Obviously his daughter doesn't want this, right? So at the very least, he has made her kind of human sex subject.
Well, that seems to be the case. Like, she's been locked away, or at least has locked herself away, and is then used for these test subjects. And even the setup is bizarre. Like, in several of the instances, you see, towards the end at least, you see that she is present during the face removal, or the at least the sort of pre-operation setup for the other girls, and she sat there like on some sort of like chaise lounge, just sort of sat there reclined, going like, well, this is a terrible thing to be happening. It's all very sort of she seems drugged, at times, or dulled down, and because there's other times when she feels more alert than others. And I was questioning sort of like, has she been drugged? Is it the painkillers? Is it something else? Is they trying to keep her drugged or whatever? Or is something else broken? I don't say broken seems the wrong word, but again, like something else broken in her. Because at the end of the film, when she leaves the house, and she, the dove lands on her arm again. That's a John Woo dove, by the way. Another side. This is a prequel to Face Off. she's more sort of like, you know, she's very sort of graceful, but you know, not, I don't know, just not alert. It's sort of, it's childlike in it, sort of in it. I think maybe they're trying to portray innocence, but it comes across almost like that she's been drugged, or she's not, you know, fully aware.
Yeah, I mean, one of the complaints about this film upon its release was that, and it was sort of panned at the time and has gone on to be super influential, was that, you know, sort of the acting was listless, that, you know, you're right about her performance. I think everybody in this seems, has a little bit like they're sort of going through the motions, but not in a bad way. I mean, you know, they're in this kind of like poetic, interesting story. I'm a huge fan of Jean Cocteau, and this reminds me of that in its style and in its look. It's much more interested in like her listlessly going around the house in this mask and what it signals about beauty and the way the shot is composed than it is in resolving that kind of question about her character.
Yeah, I agree. You know, this thing what you say going around the house, this Matt, like she's almost a ghost. You know, and that was the other thing that sort of came to mind, is that sort of like was those sort of gothic horror films, you know, sort of you know, M.R. James, or sort of you know, Turn of the Screw, just James in that case, but you know, Henry James, those sorts of gothic ghost stories of sort of like, or even like what's the one? Was it Wuthering Heights? It's got the, you know, the woman who's sort of the bride, the Charles Dickens novel with sort of the bride living in the dilapidated house. It's that thing of sort of like she's a living ghost in a house.
Is that Great Expectations?
Great Expectations. There you go. That's what I was thinking. That's right. That's my literary quote for the day.
It may be my favorite Dickens book too.
But
Miss Havisham is quite sharp. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's how it felt. Like she isn't there to be a character. You know, like there's no sort of like she is not there. And that, having that mask, that plain mask, to me, like the reason she's not acting, if she was all overacting and it was all sort of like woe is me and over dramatic, like it would be too much. Like even anything's too much. Like her listlessness is all part and part. Like I say, she's gone through this massive trauma, this car crash. She's lost her face. The mask depicts of how beautiful she was. In fact, you actually, during a face transplant, you see how beautiful she is or can be. And so to have that removed, like she's nothing more than a ghost. Like she's a wisp of what she was. And so yeah, so just the way she acts to me is exactly what I would expect. Really, she's nothing more than a pawn as well. Like she's got no she's not an antagonist in this film. She's got no active agency really until the end of the film.
She's also legally dead. Right. I mean, because the film starts with a great scene of what you later find out to be the doctor's assistant driving in a car with somebody in the back seat, and you later find out it's a body. You know, this woman is dumping a body in the water. It's the most stark. I mean, then the body is limp, and you know, it's the most stark. Amazing sort of opening, and you know, she drives this sort of like it looks like a Volkswagen, you know, and
it's a Citroen. It's a Citroen C5. So
there you go. See, I mean, between the two of us, we know Dickens, we know cars, we know tons of information, just not overlapping. Yeah, I'm lost when it comes to cars, but. Yeah, so I mean, I think, and then you find out that she's got this boyfriend who is sort of important to the plot. He's sort of the doctor's assistant at the hospital where he works. Francois, Jacques is his name. And she's not allowed to contact the boyfriend, so that listlessness for me is sort of like, and it's clear that she says that she blames her father for the accident. That it was her father's fault that he crashed this car. Then her father has faked her death, you know, started murdering girls and cutting their faces off
Yeah.
to, give her a new face, and she's not allowed to ever go out or contact her fiance because, that would blow the whole scheme.
Mm.
So, like, in a way, she is a ghost.
And that's how I think she is portrayed throughout all of this. I think that's key. I think her, I think her acting is perfect for that. Like, she's given up. She wants this thing, but she also, like you say, she doesn't. And so I think that it's really interesting. Like, she's like I say, she's a test subject, and but the father in himself, again, like, his acting is all about control. Like, there is no emotion. Like, he's almost like a sociopath. Like, there's just no emotion in it. And there's a great scene. You go back to the beginning of when he goes to identify the body, because he's claimed that his daughter is missing, presumed dead, and they find this body, and he's one of the first ones they contact, because where they found the body is nearish to this hospital he runs. And so when he goes in, he says, "Oh yes, that's definitely my daughter." And then when he leaves, the real father of the woman that's been found, or this young woman that's been found in this river, turns up, and he starts talking about his daughter, like, whatever she's called. And his doctors claimed the body and said, "Oh, no, that's my daughter." And he talks about, he says, and he says, the father's all sort of like, "Oh, I don't know what to do with myself. My daughter is still missing." And as he gets back in the car, he says, sort of like, he says, is it not strange that I have to comfort you? At least you still have hope." And I'm just like, wow, you are harsh. Like, you are cold. Like, you have literally, not only have you killed his daughter, you've then claimed her body to cover your tracks. And now you're going to diss him as well? Like, I was like, wow, you are mean.
And now you're going to demand pity from your own victim.
Yeah, like, from the relatives of your victim. Like, it was really harsh. But I think he's not like a mastermind. Like, they're not playing him. So, like you said, they've reduced this sort of mad scientist thing. He's just cold and driven, and like continually he talks about this thing of like, no, I've got to get this right. It's not to save his daughter. He wants to be able to present a test subject that says, "I've done a face transplant because I'm the first to do it." That's all this film tells me that he is interested in. But I find the father interesting. I'm fascinated. Watching him throughout the film he was just such an interesting figure. I enjoyed his acting, like the arrogance he has. So later on, the police come to investigate the hospital, and again they're looking for someone because they send in like an undercover girl, and she goes missing. And when they come to investigate, and he literally stands there and says, "Look, when they go beyond those two doors, when they leave and go beyond those doors, they're not my responsibility anymore, and I don't care." like he's like, yeah, he is, and that's just it. He's legit uncaring. Like, he is only driven by one thing. I just enjoyed hating him throughout the film, really. But I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hate him, but I mean, I just admire his determination so much. He's such an Ayn Randian figure who bends society to his will. I'm joking, but no, I mean, I think that what you're saying about him is very interesting to me because it's, I kept thinking about Frankenstein. I kept thinking about, the sort of mad scientist figure, and he is. And if you describe the film, it sounds like he's a mad scientist who's experimenting on his dogs and, doing surgeries and cutting people's faces off. And, basically these young, beautiful women are, his version of sort of stealing corpses from the graveyard, except it's more horrific because he's killing live people. And this description sounds very salacious and like completely B-movie stuff, and it never feels that way. No. It feels like an art film in a lot of respects, and a big part of it is, I think, his performance. That he comes off as cold, but he never comes off as blah. Yeah. Next, we go to the graveyard.
Yeah. He's not arch, is he? Like, it's not. We've just done a Vincent Price film. Like, it's not that at all. Like, they could have leaned into that mustache twirling, cackling at the moon kind of mad scientist. But it's not like you see how cold he is. I don't know. There's a scene that I literally sort of I actually went back and watched it again just to check something. He's successful to an extent at one point. They take a girl, take her face, and he puts it on his daughter, Christine, and then they're having dinner. And you see her face, and she's obviously, it's obviously the actress without the mask and whatever, but like they're saying, oh, this is her new face, and they're talking about all the things she can do now. Like, you have a new face, you can go off and travel, and we'll get you new papers and a new name, and it's all sort of like all hopeful. And but even as they're talking, he's like, yeah, now you can do this and you can do that, and it's sort of like, it's not done with joy, it's done with a sort of like, you've sort of got to go away so I can bring you back, but now I know it works, you know, this sort of thing. And then just as he leaves, he goes to kiss her on the head. And even as he's doing it, he's examining her. Mm-hmm. And he notices a blemish. And then they leave. It's him and his assistant, like this like I say, this slightly, this woman, another woman he saved and did surgery on his assistant. And she calls him on it. And she's like, yeah, what are you up to? Because you clearly, and he just says, I failed, or I wasn't successful. And there's no concern for like. And it clearly shows in the next bit. It's like there's no sort of like, right, we've got to get it off, get that face off because it's going to start. It could get infected. No, it then has a series of photographs of it necrotizing on his daughter's face, and he documents it. And then he's like, oh yeah, well that didn't work well, did it? So we better take it off. And it's just this thing of like the way that scene when they're walking through just leaving the house, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he just says, "I wasn't successful." And I was like, it's so pitch perfect for sort of like, it's that thing of like, I had this thing in a petri dish. I was really hoping for this result. I didn't get this result. There's a tinge of disappointment in his voice, but nothing more. Because he's like, well, we'll just have to try again. It's like Quatermass at the end of bloody Quatermass. Oh, I'm going to do another one. It's that thing. And I had to go back to say, like, does he show any real compassion to his daughter? And it feels false. It feels like a faux compassion that he's giving her during that scene. And then when he leaves, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what it is. He's barely feeling towards her at all. And I just found that really interesting.
Yeah, those are some great moments you bring up. I think in that conversation, it feels like he's very much the kind of controlling patriarch. And it's sort of like, we're going to send you away. I mean, you're dead. Here's my plan to sort of resurrect you, and it's all good. But it is said dispassionately and as if she just has to accept it because he is the patriarch. Not to mention a controlling physician. But I do love that kind of like understated way in which he spots he asks her if she's wearing makeup and then says it's nothing. And explains later to his assistant that her cheeks were rosy, and he already can see, right, where that's going, right? Yeah. He's obviously brilliant. I mean, I think that sequence of the necrotizing, image is one of the real moments of horror in this film. Yeah. What were some of the other moments for you?
This film shocked me. Proper shocked
1960 movie.
Proper shocked me because it was 1960. Because I've had for years and years and years, I've had Psycho held up as this, watershed moment of, and I've known it's not really been that because there's been other stuff before, but this watershed moment of like Hitchcock broke the mold and sort of like modern horror was born. In this film, you again, dispassionate, like there's no arch in it at all. You actually get to watch a surgery of someone's face being cut off.
Yeah.
And I'm sat there going, oh, they're going to cut away from this in a second. The moment he puts the scalpel in, I'm like, oh, okay. No, it's still going. Okay, well, she's leaning in and she's actually mopping up the blood. Oh, no, okay, well, they're going to cut away in a moment. He's done. Oh, okay. Well, now he's reaching underneath and cutting away the sinew. Jesus Christ! I'm like, am I watching some sort of like Discovery documentary? Like,
I thought of that too. Like that's normal to us today, but you can
Mm.
imagine how shocking that was in 1960, and it's done pretty well.
Oh, it's done fantastically. It's done, but it's the way it's done as well. And there's two great moments in this that I was really impressed with. Is the fact that they never get away. They don't flinch. But like but the things that I liked is it's not. You said it's not salacious. It's not gratuitous. It's not like spurting blood, and at no point do you have like a white apron with blood splattering up it or anything like that. Like, no, it's a surgery. Like, it's done as a surgery. But the one moment I found most interesting is sort of like, he leans over and he's got the pencil and he does the outline of the face, and then he does that, and then he leans in, he sort of looks at her eyes, and he circles the eyes, and it's just like it's all just in the course of things. Like, there's nothing here that is being done. It's shocking and it's graphic, but it's not gratuitous. And I was just really impressed. I was just like, this is really good. And they have like the pegs on it to lift it off and all this other stuff. The bit I was surprised about that felt gratuitous, and again would come in the 60s, a little bit later, and I was sort of made me think of Night of the Living Dead, is the moment after he's been attacked by the dog, or dogs, I should say, and you get to see his corpse, and his face has been ravaged.
Yeah.
And that's pretty graphic, because you literally see like an eyeball sort of like leering out of his
Hanging
face.
out.
And I'm like, again, I was like, bloody hell, like this is some proper stuff. Like, it's in black and white. They're not going for sort of like shock color and that. But it's unflinching. I think that is the point. It's unflinching. And it fits the theme. And that's why this must have been shocking for people, and I can see why critics would pan that in the 60s. I don't know, but that's what shocked me. Yeah, that surgery is uncomfortable.
Yes.
You
want it to cut. You think it's going to cut away, and
Yes.
you keep wanting it to cut away. I mean, I can't watch those sort of Discovery surgery shows. I mean, it's upsetting. And I have that same reaction. Like I keep thinking, like I'm amazed by what I'm watching. I'm admiring what I'm watching, but I'm also uncomfortable and want it to stop.
Yes. Yeah, I honestly thought of Saw or Hostel. The torture porn kind of sort of like early 2000s kind of films. And it crossed my mind. I thought, well, there's things I see in that where you do go, oh, yeah, and you make the noises. But you're going into those expecting that, especially like Hostel. You know what you're getting. All the Saw films, you know the formula, you know what you're getting. You're expecting that gore, that you're expecting those graphic moments. I just wasn't expecting it with this film. And then, as you say, sort of knowing the era and how the censors were at the time, to then sit through like a 3-minute sequence of this surgery was incredible. And
someone's face being cut off.
but like I say, but again, it's beautifully done because it's very like the father figure. It's just matter of fact. It's like, yeah, well, I've got to do this, and part of it is the removal. I mean, you don't see the putting on.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was shocking to me of how in that sense of, like you say, that uncomfortableness of what he is doing. Because the other point as well is, like, he's obviously doing this to a woman who has not given her consent. Like, they're going to kill her after. And so there's that element as well as like you are literally watching the murder, but doing it in a really sort of surgical way.
Well, with that woman, she recovers, and that's another great image of that woman with the bandages on her face, and like, I mean, you can kind of see a little too much skin under those bandages, but it would have done better to have a little blood makeup there. But the image of her with those bandages on is fantastic. And at one point, I think it's the assistant asked the doctor, what he's going to do with her, and he says, "I haven't decided yet." Yeah. And conveniently, she winds up escaping, and then sort of leaps to her death. And it's not. It seems to me like a suicide, although it's never explicitly said. Yeah, I mean, I found the shot with the doctor's face torn up and the I mean, I'm a big fan of the violence in RoboCop, although that is more, And I remember as a kid, I mean, I'm a huge fan of RoboCop too, and I remember as a kid when the prostitutes rob this guy on the street,
Start
and
kicking him,
then
didn't
they use their high heel to poke out his eye, and he
Yeah.
says, like, bitches, yeah, poked out my. And I remember like that, even that not seeing it, it was so horrific to me. The injury to the eye motif. Yeah, so I mean, seeing his eye hanging out there, I quite liked, and it's only for a few seconds, and the black and white is really used effectively there. And then there's a scene where she is talking to that surgery victim before she escapes, and leans in, and it's the one time that we see her without the bandages on, and it's it sort of goes in and out of focus to imitate the point of view of somebody coming out of surgery. But I thought it was shockingly effective. I thought like, this is, it's like in comics, you don't show Snake Eyes' face, right? Like there's this thing of like, it's always going to be worse in the imagination. But I thought, wow, that was really effective, especially with the makeup being used to have really dark areas that just look like bashed in or bloody.
Yeah, well, especially because of the way they've led up to it, because they go out of their way for quite some time for you not to see her face. So there's a sequence in her bedroom where she has her face buried into a pillow, and the assistant comes in, and she's obviously got some sort of like, almost like a motherly figure to an extent, because her mother's obviously died. And there's this whole thing, and they have a conversation, but you've always seen it from the back of Christiane's head. And then she gives her the mask, and that's when you see it, and you don't see anything. So for me, again, leading us again, my brain is going, it's 1960. They don't, they kind of forward. Like you said, it can never be as bad as what's in your imagination. Okay, you're never going to see her face. So when you do, again, like it's not quite. I don't want to use the word jump scare. It's not a jump scare, but it's a bit of a gut punch, because you are like, oh Jesus Christ, I did not expect that. Like that was not what I was expecting of this film. And then especially because they then give you a real face, or at least a surgery improved face later on. So this is, because for me, the other thing I was thinking about, if you do see her face, and she has a nose and she has skin, and she's clearly like a burn victim, not because she was in a car crash, but it's her face that's been mostly disfigured. They would have had to remove some of that to then apply the face that they take from this girl. And so you sort of see that. So, the question is, what you see, is that supposed to be a face without skin and all this other stuff? And so it's done really well. And so, but it plays on your mind throughout the rest of the film. When you see her in that mask, after that, you're like, like, I've seen a glimpse of it, but I'm still not sure, like, what is under that mask? No, it's incredibly effective. It really is. But it sort of produces this household. One of the things I was curious about in this film is the three of them in this household. And again, going back to this sort of like gothic motif of, you've got the hospital that he works at, which is on his grounds or wherever it is, and then he sort of lives next to it in this sort of rather grand house, and she lives at the top of it. And the three of them living in this house, it felt very sort of, at one point I thought, like, I was thinking like Addams Family kind of, it's just this gothic building with these residents in it. And you can then mirror them with the patients. They're these people that have come for these surgeries, they just seem just as trapped. Like it's another world. It's completely outside of the world. Like this hospital and this house have formed this bubble. And they're trapped in it, and the doctor's just as trapped as everybody else. And they do show that on a number of occasions, like you said, how they act, how they're being presented. Because when you meet the police were a lot more animated and a lot more sort of as you would expect, really, from a film. But I don't know what your thoughts are on. Well, firstly, the face, but.
Well, I mean, I love the sort of theme of beauty, right? And I mean, is she still beautiful? right?
Yeah.
If she has to wear this mask, I mean, how do you define this? And that mask is, apparently Carpenter said that may well have influenced his choice for Halloween. But it works better for me here, because it has that image of beauty, Mazikeen and Sandman with a sort of half mask that's scarred underneath is also sort of a very effective image. So I find it a very effective image. It's almost iconic as sort of representing marred beauty and this person who is, potentially a threat, but also a victim. I mean, I find about the whole sort of Gothic thing and that family, I keep thinking about the extent to which this is or isn't a sort of feminist film. It's dominated by a doctor, right, who's cold and distant, right, who's clearly the patriarch, has immense privilege at the hospital to the degree to which he could just tell cops, like, yeah, this is not my business. And the cops are like, yeah, that makes sense. We're gonna go away now. I mean, exemplifies male privilege. He's a stereotypical sort of French or European kind of patriarch who doesn't feel the need to explain anything. He, is very cold. He's not especially sensitive, not interested in her interior life. And yet she's more of a character than he is. And, one of the things that they did for this movie was de-emphasize the mad scientist. And then partly naturally that meant putting more emphasis on Christiane. And so, she seems very interesting. The assistant, Louise, is clearly broken up, disturbed by what they're doing, but it's in the service of this great man. So she justifies it. I mean, at one point he apologizes. It's probably the closest he comes to an emotion, that he apologizes to her for, the way he's hurt her. And she says, basically for the things she's had to do in the cause of pursuing the heterograph. And the assistant says, bien sûr, like, of course you've hurt me too. Like, there's no shying away from that. But she's justifies it all in the service of this great man and his mission, his research. But then ultimately, it is the daughter who's the plaything, who's a sort of captured, sort of bird in a gilded cage, who releases the animals and symbolically murders the assistant in a sort of charmingly bizarre sort of moment, and ultimately has agency. I mean, the cops don't do anything. Ultimately this is all foiled by a woman deciding, I'm not going to be that plaything in this Gothic kind of situation anymore.
Well, you say about the bird in the cage, and from that idea is some of the things in this film are subtle, some less so. But one of the things, like, there's been no birds in this film at all for the most part, and then she kills her father and this assistant and leaves, and then a bird lands on her, and she sort of like drifts off into the woods carrying this dove, and it's like a clear representation of, like, oh, she's as free as a bird. Oh, okay. It's not the most subtle of images in the film, but I agree. I think this idea of especially the three of them, but the assistant in particular is this fascinating character as well, because she feels beholden to the doctor, because he she had an accident as well. Like, she's been in some sort of tragic accident and had some of her own surgery. If I believe right, she has I'm not sure where it is, but she's had some sort of facial surgery, but also across her neck. Like, she wears this selection of a pearl necklace as a choker, and it's recognized, it's raised several times as being an identifier. And it's there that she is stabbed later on. that is the part that is actually sort of stabbed and attacked. So one of the things I found interesting is that for her, although she is beholden, like she has this motherly feeling towards Christiane. She is still just playing a part. Like she has these emotions towards Christiane, but like Christiane sort of like is torn between what she represents as a sort of like a mother figure, but also the thing of what part she's playing in these acts. And so like when she stabs her, like you say, you pointed, she kills her in this weird way. She stabs it in the wound. It's covered by that necklace, the pearl necklace I've just mentioned, sort of as a choker. That's hiding scars from the surgery that her father did. And then her father is killed by the dogs tear his face up. And so it's this sort of like the murders are sort of done as almost as an act of, or the escape is an act of rebellion against everything her father represents. Like she keeps the mask, attacks his previous work, and then his face gets disfigured and all torn up and stuff. And I just thought that to me was like, say, this thing of the agency, but this thing of for the assistant in particular to be killed in that way, I thought was rather tragic, because she obviously had a life before. She's then had this accident and the surgery's given, and she's then beholden and sort of feels like she's sort of trapped or dragged into this scenario, at least psychologically, to then have to be attacked in the way that where she was fixed. It's a really sort of, it is quite poetic. But yeah, I don't know. Like I say, she's. I just find the assistant interesting as well. That like so.
Yeah, I mean, did you feel bad for her? I kind of felt bad for her and the stabbing. I mean, the thing is, you would expect in a film that at the climax, I mean, basically this whole plot with the cops has like fizzled out, right? I mean, it's a red herring. The cops are useless. And, you would expect in most films for Christiane to like hold that scalpel and say like, it's time you got yours. And, there would be an exchange of dialogue. And she'd say, you don't want to do this. I was only helping him. No, like as soon as we see that scalpel, it's already in her neck. I mean, it's just, it happens so quickly. And that's a great point about, where her scars are, that it, enhances the poetry. I mean, obviously, the doves are a little much, the dogs are interesting. I like how she's nice to them, but obviously the scientist has been torturing them. But I found myself feeling bad for that assistant as she's stabbed. And then she only says a few words and sort of collapses. And it's so charmingly sort of like anticlimactic.
Well, again, it's factual. It's that thing, isn't it? It's like everything else in this film. It's cold and factual. Like, there's no big dramatic death scene. There's no, dialogue or monologue about revenge or redemption or justification for the murders or anything like that. No, it just sort of happens, which is very sort of like, it's very straightforward. It's very factual. It's quite cold. And even sort of Christiane doesn't really shed a tear or anything for it. Like she clearly shows some sort of remorse, but not beyond a moment's remorse, and then moves on. And so, yeah, I like that though. I like the fact that it's not arch, that it's not this camp kind of. It doesn't lead into that at all.
Well, and the doctor never gets a moment where he says, the sort of typical Victor Frankenstein sort of monologue about like, science can't be stopped, and you can't stop great men, and these lesser men want to stop me. You're quite right. There never is that speech. I think that the closest we get to sort of like Christiane showing emotion is when she calls Jacques, and then basically clearly is Christiane, and then hangs up. And I think is talking to the assistant, and the assistant says, sort of, what are you doing? And Christiane cries, and you see her crying through that alabaster mask. But it's crying for this man who she obviously loves, who loves her, knowing that this man is suffering, believing that she's dead, knowing that even if she gets a face, she can't resume her old life. She can never go back to him. how is any of this good? This is all what her father wants. But those tears and that image does way more work than all of the sort of arch monologues that you're
Yeah.
describing as being absent.
Well, it's that thing of show don't tell. You know, in many of these films, you know, yes, you know, we like in some films, you know, you like a good monologue, or you know that you'll get the fist pumping moment where the hero wins over the villain or whatever. But this isn't about that, you know, and that's the thing. Because you're right. Because a part of me wonders, and one of the things I think that's the more interesting is when she goes off into the night at the end of the film. Like, is it to die? What is it to do? To live her life? What does she do? Is she still dangerous? Like, you know, I don't know. I don't know what it. This sounds horrible, but I don't know who it is or what it is that escapes into the night at the end of the film. Because you don't know her her mind at the end of the film. Like, where is her head at? And she's just obviously committed these acts against her captors. But is she going to run to the police? Is she going to, like, you don't know, and you're never left to know that. And so, yeah, they showed you this emotion, but then they leave you guessing later on because she's clearly broken.
Well, it wouldn't be a French film if it weren't ambiguous in some way, right?
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's that sort of thing. Like you said, you made me think. Like, you know, you said Carpenter, as in, you know, John Carpenter, influenced by this from The Mask. The end, or there are certain parts in this film. There are certain shots in this film that, like, talking again about the girl that escapes with the bandaged face when she escapes through the house, and the father is the doctor is chasing her up through the house, not particularly chase, but following her. Let's say some of those shots, to me, I was like, were very reminiscent of Halloween '78. Yeah, there's that sort of like the trench coat and the face. I was like, oh. No, he looks a bit like Dr. Loomis. Like, there's even a look about him, but they've kept that sort of look. But I do like that chase as well, though. I do like the idea that she can't get out of the house because when he tells her, like, he's at the garage doors, and you know, you say thingy, like, it's almost like slasher Michael Myers or Jason, because when he says, like, you know, I'm not decided what to do with that, but then when she says she's escaped, he doesn't run into the house. He sort of just goes, okay. And then turns and walks into the house, and I was like, "Oh God, this isn't going to end well." And so yeah, he follows her into the house up the stairs, and just the way it's lit, it's one of those daft moments where you're like, "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Like, you know, and you say it was suicide. I don't think it was intended. It's almost like a last effort. She gets to the top and there's a room, and she gets into the room and sort of like slam. You hear the door slam, and that's what sort of propels him to go up the stairs. The final push, and then you hear the clatter and the scream as she goes through the window. And to me, I was like, oh no, she reached the end of a path and was like, yeah, there's no way out of this. Like, I've ran as far as I'm going to run. But I honestly think if she'd have gotten to the front door. I think she would have run out into the night and got to the police. I think it was a last ditch. I don't think she intended to commit suicide because she found like that she had her face missing or anything like that. I think.
Oh yeah, no, I am also puzzled by why she decides to flee into the house and upwards. I mean, you know, that might be a flaw in the film, but no, I don't think that she flees intending to commit suicide. I'm just saying that when she finds herself sort of being pursued and at the height of the house and thinks there's no way out of this, she decides to throw herself through.
Yeah.
That she's not accidentally falling through the window or jumping to try to get to a lower level. It might be an impulsive decision, but it seems to me that it, you know, contingently in that situation, she's decided to kill herself.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk about the police in this film.
Yes. Yeah.
Because in every other film, you know, we've suffered in every area. You suffer useless police officers in movies. It happens, you know, the blundering police that blunder around and they're all sort of made to look silly because everybody else sort of ends up catching up quicker. But you're right in the fact that in this one, they start off trying to be proactive. Like they come up with a plan, like straight away to try and infiltrate the hospital. Yet they are dismissed so quickly and effectively after this event. And part of me wanted to like, is this because it did that threw me for a bit of a loop. I thought they were going to come back. I thought there was a follow up, and they never do. As you say, it's a red herring. But they start off well, almost with the right tone. Like, they sort of like almost manipulate a young woman into being used as an undercover operative. They've got this plan, and you think, oh yeah, this is gonna culminate. It does. It literally does. It results in the climax. But they are not a part of that climax. If this was the American version, those two police officers would have been driving away, and they'd have had the realization moment. They'd have spotted something, or there'd have been some other reason, the Columbo moment of just one more thing, and they'd have gone back, and they'd have been, they would have been a part of the climax. But they are literally dismissed from the film, and I sort of struggled with that a little bit, maybe because of my expectations. But yeah, I don't know. What were your thoughts on the police?
Well, I think that there are a lot of elements about the end of the film that I both like and am not sure that I like. And the police are one of them. I mean, I think that I kind of love that they are compassionate. They let this woman off before they decide to blackmail her. But I mean, they do let her off. I mean, it's like, okay, just scare her a little and, let her go. I like that they are competent at their job, but I also like that they don't figure it out. And I'm sort of a sucker for detective movies in which the audience knows more than the detective, or in which the detectives are good guys and they're competent, but they never quite can piece it together. So I love that stuff. I think that stuff works well. I do think it's a little quick how they're dismissed. It's like, oh, well, we set this woman in. She's missing, Obviously she's been here. And the doctor's assistant, Jacques, is also ready. It's like, oh, well, she left of her own free will. I mean, they've already said that they're going to call to see if she got home. It seems absurd that they are dismissed that easily. But I do like, the depiction of the police, and that ultimately they are not able to solve it. And that the role, as you say, that they serve in the plot is really just to get the doctor out of the house so that Christian can, release the patient and then let the dogs loose and kill the assistant and everything. So I guess in that sense, it's important. On the other hand, there's a kind of like structuralist in me that says, really the finale of this film, because of that, the finale of the film could have happened at any time, right? I mean, yes. Christian could have just said, enough of this, daddy, stab Louise and, let the dogs loose. I mean, it could have happened at any time.
But that's the problem. That's the problem I sort of have, that there's no trigger moment for her. Yes, we've got this final, I believe, third victim, because you've seen someone die at the beginning, so this will be the third one that's going to happen. What's different about this third one? What has happened for her to be saying, no, this is enough? And there's no sort of defining moment. And that's what I find is a bit of a problem, where, there's no... I'm happy that there's no... none of the monologues. I'm happy that it's all very sort of like frank and it sort of happens in a sort of quite a cold way. And I understand that people are complex, and sometimes it doesn't always take a large trigger moment for people to change their mind. It can just be you reach a conclusion, and that seems to be the sort of the position to her, because she's on this chaise longue watching this woman sat on a bed, and she sort of there's this moment where, and because she can't express anything because of this mask, she just sort of gets up and you're like, oh, what's she gonna do? And I'm looking at the timer and going, well, there's only like 10 minutes left of the film, so something's gonna happen. And then she lets her free. But to me, there's nothing where she's like, well, now is the moment I rebel. Now is the moment where this is too far. Like, I, I have lost an opportunity. I don't know. There's like a beat missing in the film for me.
I mean, I do think that it sort of like accelerates at the end. And I had the same sort of feeling, like sort of it's about an hour and 30 minutes, like movies used to be. And for the first 30 minutes, I thought, well, I love the opening scene, but this is a bit slow. I'm enjoying the shots. I like the setup. And by the end, you're like, there's 10 minutes left to go. And so much stuff happens in those 10 minutes. It's really kind of amazing. My take on that is that she's called Jacques. I mean, that's the main difference. And probably that her dad is out of the house. I mean, that she, there is this kind of patriarchal, including at that dinner where they think the graft is taken, where it's like, you're clearly unsatisfied with this. Why don't you stand up to him? I mean, you don't have a face. What's he going to do? What is he going to do to you? You don't want to live. But she seems incapable of standing up to daddy and to that sort of masculine, aggressive, assertive power of the doctor father who embodies all of that.
Well, exactly. But that's the problem, because there's been no rebellion up until now. Like the rebellion has been her running to her room to cry into a pillow. It's not been a proactive, almost aggressive rebellion. It's been really sort of very passive. And so again, that recalling of Jacques, I can understand what you're saying, because it's that moment she tries to talk to him and she hangs up, and it's that change. But it's almost the end of the film feels like a change of attitude. Yes, her father's at the house, but we also know he's been at the house a lot because he obviously runs this flaming hospital. So there must have been times when she was alone in the house with the second victim when the face peel, the face took to begin with. And so again, it's like, there's just something. There's a slight beat of something, or even something like a build up of why now? Even to me, I was thinking because Jacques gives up. Jacques sort of just, again, he's another one. He he shakes hands with the police, and he's sort of like, yeah, well, you tried your best, better luck next time, and all that tally ho. If I could see a moment, and I know I do this, and I apologise if I sort of jump in and try and correct a film that's as a classic. But if you just had a moment of her, if they did that within sight of the house, and she from a window saw that the authorities and the love of life have abandoned this thing, and she's now like, oh yeah, shit, no, I'm alone in this now. I'm done. That to me would be enough to be an instigating moment of no, this is it. There is no out. That could be. I would accept that as enough for her to then be sat on that chaise lounge and be like, no, this can't go on. I can't keep losing these people. I can't be trapped in this, and that'd be enough. But there isn't anything. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that would be interesting. Although she doesn't know that the police are investigating, right? No. So to see them walk away is sort of like, oh, she doesn't know that they're giving something up if she saw that. I wasn't bothered by her sort of not having that clear moment of motivational change. I thought that, it's interesting what we object to and what we don't in terms of ambiguity. That, for me, that was not a problem. For me, I thought, well, she's seen at least 3 now. She clearly is unsatisfied. She visits. She's lurking around the house. She's going into the lab when she's sneaking in. She's not supposed to. She's called Jacques. She's not supposed to. She, clearly misses. She's crying. She clearly is deeply unsatisfied and upset, but is unable to openly resist her father. So maybe she's just had enough. Maybe she's planned this. At the same time, there's a kind of whimsy to it. I mean, sometimes we don't know. I mean, look, I am prone to being very nice until I hit a point where I can't take it anymore, and I'm just like, what the effing hell are you saying? You know?
Yeah, that'd be Demolition Man. But yeah,
We
But
shall
you're right.
see.
yeah, you're right, because I think I totally agree with what you're saying. And to me, it's a nitpick. I am really like, I'm nitpicking because you're right, because of the poetry of the film, the way that the film's paced. Like, it's bound to happen. And so when it does happen, it's not shocking that she does save the girl, because it's clearly going to happen. But I think, again, it's the thing I've said before, like, as being used to modern cinema, there's an expectation, there's a beat that I expect. I would have expected that beat. Does it ruin the film for me? Does it ruin the climax? No, not at all. I should be clear. Like, I still really enjoy it, and I think it works. It just felt a little bit. It is rushed. Like, if they could even drag this out, this ending could be another 5 to 7 minutes longer, and work just as well, and work better, in fact. But no, it's a nitpick more than anything, really, that I'm looking for, because I enjoy so much of this film.
Yeah, no, I think, it's legitimate. I mean, I think that, the dove is overly done. I wonder if her, and I also wonder, I mean, she could be going off to die. On the other hand, she could be going to Jack at the end. She could be, going to try to find the police, or just go next door to the hospital and say, who she is. Will she be believed? I mean, she's a murderer now. I mean, there are a lot of questions at the end. I think what's important is that image. And I think that, that image of her going off into the woods, it feels, the first time you see it, it feels like I've seen this before. This is so iconic. It feels like this is the ending that in my gut I go for in a horror movie or a slasher movie, of just sort of like, oh yeah, there was no justice. People just did these things, and this person goes off into the night, and you don't need to be told what it's about. But
that was the end of Halloween '78. Yeah, the ending is Michael is shot off the balcony. They go down. He's not there. There was never an intention to have a follow up. It was the studio that followed that up, and you're supposed to be left with this notion of Michael is still out there. He is the boogeyman. And sorry, I interrupt you, but there was a point I was going to make, but I'll let you finish.
Well, I was just wondering, like, does she clearly wants to free the second victim whose face she gets, right? I mean, she goes to visit. She decides, with her father gone, to, she makes the decision to free this third victim. But I wonder, has she planned to stab the assistant? I mean, is this ultimately impulsive? Has she planned to let the dogs in? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, it does not feel methodical.
No, impulsive is how it felt to me, which is why I'm willing to let the ending go, because it feels a bit like she sat there on that couch, and then there is that thing of us in her head going like, no, this is enough. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do it. And so the attack on the assistant, what was her name? Louise. It feels, like you say, it feels impulsive. Like you said, it almost like a reflex. Like, she appears and it's like, oh shit, and she stabs her. And it's like, again, it's not about rage or passion. It's not an act of passion. It's almost, there's no anger. I don't know if there's anger there. It's just no, I'm escaping, and you are now my jailer. You are in my way, and it just happens that way, I feel. And the same with the dogs. Like, I don't think she intends to release the dogs to act as a weapon against her father. Like, they're not released to be like, it's not like release the hounds kind of moment. Like, she is just freeing them, and it just so happens that her father is coming in through the gate where the dogs exit. That's it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's happenstance more than anything. But that sort of feeds into the way I sort of like, one of the things I thought about after watching this was urban legends. Not the film series Urban Legend, but as an urban legend. And this felt like a cross between like a dark fable and an urban legend. Like I could imagine kids telling this story around a campfire, you know, sort of the faceless woman that stalks the woods if you go camping, you know. You know, don't fall asleep or she'll come and cut your face off or whatever. But like this is the story that you tell, the woman that was locked in their house and these people that were killed, and she eventually killed her captors and is now roaming the woods and stuff like that. This is an urban legend. It's a campfire and it's beautifully told. But that ending, to me, the ambiguity and that sort of thing is exactly the same as any urban legend, you know, sort of anything from what the stupid, well, I say stupid ones, but the ones like finding the dog hung in the bathroom with a note saying, you know, whatever, some of the gross ones, or the call is coming from in the house, all those kinds of sort of like things. She's out in the world. And you say, you don't know. Does she go to Jacques? Does she go to the police? Does she just go off and roam into the woods? You know, I don't know. It felt like that as a sort of more of like a modern urban legend or fairy tale as well, linking it with that gothic feel.
Yeah, I mean, I am so in love with the visual. You know, we've talked about the poetic sort of nature of this, but just with those visually arresting images, especially with it being in black and white. I think her leaving like that, obviously, the mask itself is, you know, visually arresting. And there were a lot of, you know, we talked about the surgery. I mean, there are a lot of, even the way the staircases are shot. You know, you were talking about the fleeing of the second victim. You know, there are so many just arresting images, and I am such a sucker for that. I mean, if you give me something that makes me feel something, or makes me, you know, just in the beauty of the shot, you know, in the poetry of what this means, I can put up with a lot in a movie if I'm moved by something like that. And so I don't need to have all of these things explained. It feels right. And I think that's, you know, I mean, maybe it's a stereotype of the French, but I mean, this idea of sort of like, make sure that it's beautiful, make sure that the plot feels right. If it feels right to you, you don't need to understand why. It will feel right to enough of the audience. I mean, this is not the way our countries make movies.
No, but this is why, to me, at least, there is a you know, like a poetic nature to this film. As you sort of say, the shots are in some cases stark. You know, sort of using the use of the black and white, and in others, they are plain. Like they keep things relatively plain, but it's all for a reason. It all has a justification. But one of the things I think about this film, as you say, is it doesn't follow the narrative structure we would expect. You know, like say, the police aren't involved in the finale. No, there's not a big moment where she has a realization or a redemption moment or whatever. But neither does life.
Mm-hmm.
So there's moments in this where you've seen the surgery and all this other stuff, and it's very stark and it's very practical. Well, all right. Well, so's her story. In some cases, these things happen. You said about whimsy. You know, it feels real. It feels real.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's the sort of French thing of like, you know, if it feels right, and there are parts of that I sort of resent in other films, in lesser films, and I don't know that I'm entirely comfortable with it even in this film. I have this sort of part of my brain that says that what I like are sort of narratives that feel inevitable, right? And it does feel inevitable that at some point she would do this, right? She would rebel. That's part of why I'm not bothered by her having the lack of a realization moment. But typically I'm bothered by when things don't feel inevitable, when it's just like, you look back and you say, this plot could have resolved itself in 10 different ways. Yeah. It doesn't, there's no way that it went except sort of the whimsy of the director. On the other hand, I love the word whimsy. I mean, I love this. So I have kind of a love-hate relationship with that in plots.
but is it a case of end point? You know, like, you know the inevitability of this story is that she as a character is not going to die, or at least that's my expectation, and that this is going to have some sort of resolution. And throughout the story, you are told quite repeatedly that sort of like certain things are never going to happen. She's never going to get back with Jacques. You know, you are not going to have there's no inkling that there's going to be the question of, can Jacques love someone without a face? You know, they're not even going to try and address that question. It's quite frankly like, even if you got a face, you will look like somebody else. So he is out the question as a sort of like, you know, so that resolution is never going to come. And so to me, there is an inevitability. Like, even when this ends, she's alone. And so like I say, so taking the whimsical route now, especially for the finale, I'm okay with. The happenstance of the end feels fine to me. As you said, feels right, because it's inevitable that this is going to happen. So getting there in that fashion feels it feels real. Like, you know, yeah, someone impulsive can easily go, screw it, this is what I'm going to do right now. This is what I'm going to do. I've had enough, and I'm going to do it. And so you get then the whimsy. Whimsy feels too soft. I mean, she just stabbed someone in the throat and that sort of thing. So maybe not whimsy, but like, you know, she's taken by an impulse, and then it's the impulse beyond that is, well, I've set the woman free. I have the impulse then to kill, you know, Luis, and then set the dogs free, and it becomes this sort of like, to me, it's like not a tidal wave. It's the wrong word. It's not that strong. It's almost like a cascading of events. Like, she's like, well, yes, I've set the victim free. So in doing that, I've got to face the consequences. And the first consequence is Luis. And so I've got to take her out. And that's what happens. And it's all impulse. And then she's like, well, I can't escape and leave these poor dogs behind that she's been kind to. So letting them go becomes the next inevitability. Mm-hmm. And then it's just coincidence that her father is entering through that point and is taken out. Like, you don't get, and I think this is interesting as well, where you've said about her standing up to her father. She never has to.
Right. Yeah, she doesn't examine the corpse or, you know, talk to it as he has his dying last words. You know?
Well, other scenarios in this film would have been her getting to that door and him stood there and acting like, you know, back to your room, you know, you are my daughter, sort of thing, and then her setting the dog on him, or the, you know, her proactively killing him. But she never has to face up to the patriarchy, as you've said. Like, she never has to face it down, because it is done for her. Fate steps in and takes him out before she has to have that confrontation, and then she can just sort of like gently just waft into the woods. So, you know, that in itself, like, you know, to me sort of says, like, you know, it's whimsy is the thing, but it's almost just it's a cascade of events, coincidences almost, that allow her to escape.
Yeah, if it feels sort of like a fairy tale or like a Greek myth, you know, exactly, where it's like, this is how it would go, right? And you could imagine as a writer thinking like, okay, well, how are we going to end this? And you think, okay, well, obviously she's going to rebel. She, you know, she's got to, like you said, she's got to do this. And then you think, well, do we have this confrontation or whatever? And you think, no, you know, he's killed by the dogs, that he's tormented. This is, you know, and because he's away, that sort of gave her the opportunity to do all of this in the first place. Then, of course, he's returning at the same time that dogs who he's tortured are running out of the house. Okay, I mean, that feels right. It feels right. It feels like the way it would go in a fairy tale or, you know, a Greek myth or something like that. And yeah, it has the side effect of, you're quite right, and I hadn't thought about that, of sort of that she never gets that conflict. You know, she has agency, but it's never there's never like that. And maybe I like it for this reason. There's never that sort of like, you know, if this is a movie that avoids those arch moments, there's not that arch feminist moment where she says, you know, Father, you've treated me like an experiment and I've had enough. You know, women are doing it for themselves now, Father. You know, I mean, I'm joking. I don't really hate that stuff as much as I'm sounding, but it avoids even that kind of cliche.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Like, if this was a modern film, there would be that moment of standing up to the father. But she it's the fact that she never has to, and it makes me wonder. You say about the sort of could this end 10 different other ways? Well, is there another ending where she doesn't let the dog go and she just wanders through, or timing just so happens that the dogs all run out and then he turns up after and confronts her? Does this end in a different way? It's that thing of she may have been strong enough to kill Louise, but I still think that was a reflex, like an impulsive moment. But could she have done the same to her father? And you never get that question answered. But you don't need it answered because
right.
The events lay out, and she just, like you say, if she just stopped to show even a single sign of remorse for her dead father, then the question is left in the air of could she have beaten him? But the fact that she sort of just steps over him, like literally just steps over the corpse, and he's like, I'm free, and then goes off. It sort of it bypasses that moment, really.
Yeah, and it's another sort of like oddly cold moment. It's sort of like, and it feels right. I mean, why should she care? She clearly has lost something of herself through this whole process. The killing of Louise is, for me, a moment of real horror that goes along with the sort of more hostile-like surgery and revelations of the face and everything. There is, I think, the best bits of horror remind us of things that are existentially terrifying to ourselves, right? And I think there is in that moment a sort of this horrific idea that have you ever it's like when you're driving a car and you think it is freaking amazing that we as humans are all staying in our lanes and we don't have accidents all the time, because I don't trust humans to carry a cup of coffee around across the room successfully. How in the world are we doing this? It blows me away. And sometimes you look at a knife and you think, there's nothing keeping this from penetrating my skin or anybody else's skin. We are so vulnerable. And the way that she kills Louise is just sort of like taking that scalpel and just sliding it in and letting go. Yeah. There's no dramatic moment. It's not like our death has to come by, a maniac with a knife stabbing Psycho style. It's just sliding that knife through the skin. There's something existential about that for me.
No, I agree. It's because it's not like an outburst of violence. It's not like putting this akin to like Psycho, and say sort of the shower scene or one of the other my favorite moments from Psycho is when the guy's at the top of the stairs and he slashes at the guy and he falls down the stairs. Those are expressed as a moment of violence. It's not an impulse. It's not a sort of reflex. They are moments of violence. This isn't. None of this is especially from Christiane, is a moment of violence. It's an impulse, and it's almost like, say, at that moment in her head, Louise is a blocker. And it's not like a revenge. It's not a moment of it's not a passion killing. It's not like kind of thing. It's like you say. But I'm still not sure she has not remorse. Probably. I'm sure she has remorse for it. But is it regret for the? It's remorse for having had to do it. But there's no regret for having done it. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it's sort of it's an emotionless act. In the same way that I hadn't thought about it, but how emotionless this film is.
Yeah.
The other thing that shocks me, that is a real sort of that I thought of, that is a real sort of horrifying moment, is Louise scoping out the next victim.
Oh, yes.
And and there it's like, oh, I mean, I think she's already sort of expressed the regret, and you certainly know what she's doing, and she's scoping out that next victim. And you think like, I mean, and here again, it's that sort of like existential thing where you think like, how many people in cars looking innocent, looking, this is a nice looking, sort of middle-aged woman sitting in a car watching college students pass by or whatever in Paris. Nobody would ever think, oh, she's choosing who's going to have their face removed next. And it's just terrifying.
Well, the thing is as well, the opening of this film, beyond her dumping the body, is her going into Paris, I believe, or the town, and she joins a queue. I think it's for a cinema or something like that, and basically just joins a young woman in conversation. And she says, "Oh, would you, I'll buy you lunch or whatever." And in this climate at the moment of I don't want to go into the whole Me Too thing, but this idea of sort of like aggressive male attention from towards women. Again, in 1960, they're sort of going like, I don't know, they're not, this is not a film like Peeping Tom or even sort of Psycho of the sort of the broken male figure sort of stalking women. Again, this is a practical moment. It's not about feeling, it's not about emotion. It's like you say, it's an attractive middle-aged woman just singling out a younger woman in the crowd and then using her disarmament. She disarms her by being an attractive middle-aged woman.
Yeah.
To then say, yeah, no, of course I'll buy you lunch and we'll have this. And then, oh yeah, I've got something. I can't remember how she gets her back to the house or whatever. But then there's this thing of sort of she gets her back to the house.
It's a place to stay, right?
Yes.
It's never really explained that the young woman is homeless or needs this somehow, but obviously is a little hard on her luck.
Yeah, it's not entirely clear, but like it's this moment of, like you say, it's not a sleazy moment in that sort of thing of like, I've got somewhere. If it was a male figure, even if it was the doctor doing it, which could be a possibility, but or as you said, like Igor going out, that sort of character, like trying to pursue women to get them back. It's not that. It's just very convivial. It's very nice. And it ends in her face being taken off.
Why don't you come with me? The doctor has tests for you.
Like Peter Lorre style Igor, sort of like.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that, watching that, I thought, oh, that's clever. That's some smart maneuvering, and it's so innocent. Won't you take this free ticket? You relax them with going to see the movie. And then it's, oh, let's get the coffee. Oh, really? You need a place to stay. I mean, you find some excuse to get them back to your place. And then she's chloroformed and has her face cut off, right?
Yeah.
It's quite horrifying. And having seen that, knowing that Louise sitting in that car is evaluating every passerby for looking like the Christian. Like this arbitrary thing, like I mean, it's like a serial killer having a type or something,
Oh, totally. That totally crossed my mind. Of every serial killer film I've seen since the 90s, of like, oh, we can now do a, what they call it, like a model or a sort of, oh, they have a type, and it's because, they were beaten by their mother or something as a kid, whatever it is. Yeah, that totally crossed my mind. Of like, that's exactly what this is. Like, she's sat looking for the and again, the one thing I was a little and again, it'd be too much. It's a 1960s, it's 1960s. Like, this technology is not clear, there, but there's nothing of like, her face is, they've got to have a similar build or at least similar height and similar proportions. Otherwise, so people have different size heads. Like, I don't want to be stretching her face over so she looks like, sort of plastics, like, like someone's 60-year-old with plastic surgery and a facelift. There's considerations you've got to make. But it's just it is really creepy. The other thing I find creepy as well is you get to see a presentation. Yeah, this is one of those few films we've had films with what was it? Them gave us a nice PowerPoint presentation. This also gives you a presentation because the doctor is actually presenting to colleagues or peers about his progress and his findings about how actually he can do this without them being similar blood types and stuff with this radiation therapy and other stuff. But he says, like, but unfortunately the dose is so much at times that it could kill people and all this other stuff. And so, like,
and the solution is exsanguination, right? To take the blood out so the radiation. I mean, this is all bizarre, and you never see him draining blood from. I mean, it's just a sci-fi excuse, right?
It is, but I love the fact again that the coldness of this film is like, or arrogance maybe, is that he is basically given in a presentation in a TED talk is telling people how he's killing other people. But it's these things that are so real, like, and it's not like a Hannibal Lecter arrogance where he's like, oh, of course he's doing this and he's serving up human remains to his guests at parties. No, he has to make a presentation. He has these findings, and the whole film's about he wants to prove it. So of course he's going to do these presentations. Like, it's not an arrogance. To him, it's just, why wouldn't I present these findings?
Well, and what he's saying is ostensibly innocent, right? I mean, but of course we know he's describing his killing technique, it's a little like, sort of Patrick Bateman giving a presentation and saying, like, the important thing about stocks is being able to have the killer instinct when you see your victim. I mean, and I really liked the shots of the audience reacting in that scene. And you see a priest, you see like all these representatives of conservative French society, right? Which is traditionally a Catholic country. And, here's a priest listening to a killer describe what he's doing. And it's like, oh, you're a respectable person. I'm a respectable person. It's not thinkable that you are, this great doctor making, ingenious advances. I mean, he's the opposite of that's the opposite of the mad scientist, right? Who seems like disheveled and, don't go to the Frankenstein place, he is infinitely respectable. I mean, I thought there's that like Richard Gere movie about a doctor who's a killer who gets off on playing God or something.
Primal Fear or one of those.
Yeah, something like that. And I thought of these like doctor movies that play on, like the godlike power of doctors and whether they get off on this. And there's that whole layer too.
Well, it's like a built-in arrogance beyond a certain point, isn't it? Like, to the extent of like it's a cliche. At this point, not 1960, but by modern standards, like if you were to watch. Hell, Scrubs took the mickey out of it. This idea of guys doing, the surgery jocks that have a god complex, or they're the ones that sort of like, and like Grey's Anatomy, ER. Like, I can name all these shows. They all acknowledge this idea of surgeons being the ones that feel that they're the ones saving the world. Even Doctor Strange, like, in the film, the Marvel, they acknowledge this idea, the arrogance of the surgeon. There's a scene in that. The reason he has to crash is because he is filtering through potential cases of which ones will further his career, which ones are going to look most impressive, or which ones are the biggest challenge. So, it's almost like the a layer of respectability over the mad scientist. Like if you go back to like you're saying that the David Whale Frankenstein, and you have that sort of like, it's alive. That's the other extreme. But this guy is just he sees himself as just a surgeon, but he is just as crazy and just as mad scientisty as that. It's just a matter of perspective, I suppose.
And that's the sort of like Patrick Bateman thing that, I mean, he doesn't present as a mad scientist. I mean, you're never, I mean, like if your daughter is marrying that guy, you'd think, oh, you're marrying up. This is a great catch, right? Yeah. Like, and maybe he's a little boring, he's a little flat affect, but not crazily so, not enough to set off giant alarms or something. You know, I mean, it's that sort of you're right, it's become a cliche, but that sort of doctorly arrogance.
Yeah, but it makes me wonder, like, is the doctor, is the father in this, like, you know, could you class him as a psychopath or a sociopath in some respects? Because, like you say, he is completely dispassionate about what he's doing. You know, there is no, you know, he manipulates people. He has the arrogance. You know, he feels that he should be the one that listened to and be respected without any real due cause. He is completely dispassionate about this, about his daughter's condition. Like, he makes her continue to wear the decaying face of somebody else so that he can further his, and then takes photos of it.
We've all done that.
Yeah. But like you say, the disposing of the bodies and the moving on from victim to victim, like, there is no remorse. Even at the end of the film, there is no remorse for anybody else. And so, like, he is, like, Patrick Bateman's a really good example of this same thing, of, like, even with Patrick Bateman, like, one, you know, the American Psycho, he gives into his impulses, and it's that moments of sort of, like, again, gratuitous moments of violence, there's outbursts of violence, whether it be chasing hookers down with a chainsaw, or, you know, macheting someone because they have a differing opinion about an album or something. This guy is stone cold in that respect, and it's all about what he sees as his objective, and to me, that's really scary.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a version of this character that is, I mean, I wasn't terrified by him, but I think that there is a version of this character that is truly terrifying, who has both, because you're talking about, it's a good point about Bateman, that he, you know, I mean, you can play him to be square, but then he's still clearly enjoying, you know, killing that guy. You know, but then we kind of, like, slide into the flat affect, you know, the truly flat affect, because, you know, who then has to say, like, you know, as he's twirling the knife, you know, I want you to know I take no pleasure in this, right? And we've gotten a lot of that in cinema. But then there's another degree beyond that of just the guy who says nothing. Yeah. As, you know, the victim screams for their life or begs and pleads and just does not even reply and just slides the knife in. And you know, that's such a shock in a movie, right? Where it's just like, you've missed that opportunity to have that, you know, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die sort of speech. You know, and that's why that scalpel is so horrifying. It's why, you know, he is so potentially horrifying as a killer, that you don't get any explanation. There is no monologue. He's not interested in, you know, I mean, he never, there's no aftercare for his patients. He's totally, I mean, he chloroforms them, cuts their face off. You never even see, like, Louise talk to them and say, like, look, we don't know what's going to happen with you, but the surgery's over. You're alive. Nobody even tells them anything. They just don't care.
Exactly. No, it's that incoherent. It's not. But it tells you again that the moment he says they step out the doors of his hospital, they are no longer his responsibility. The moment those victims leave his surgery table, they are no longer his responsibility. I would not be surprised. To me, I don't think it's the doctor that puts the second victim in that cell and puts bandages on her face. That's Louise. Yeah. Like, she is the aftercare. She's the only one that's going to give a shit, and she's the only one that's going to make any attempt. She takes her food and then gets bonked on the head with a bottle, and that causes the escape. And then when he says, like, you know, what are you going to do? And I haven't made my mind up. There is a part of me that thought that, you know, the scene when he has the dogs, and he's got the dog laying on the table, and there's a shaven part in the dog, and he's sort of, the indication is that he's done skin transfers or skin graft transplants on the dogs, and they've been successful. Yeah. There's a part of me that's thinking, like, he's keeping these people alive for further experimentation. Like, God. he's gonna try, if he had 2 people alive down there with that faces, he'd be like, can I now do hand transplants? Can I now do, you know, this? And again, not thinking I'm going to take pleasure in cutting up that poor young woman. It's, well, I've done this. Can I now achieve that?
Right.
And I have these two people here, so can I swap their hands? Let's try that. Go get my scrubs. Let's go.
You do that very well. Do you have any equipment in your basement, Scott?
Yeah. My Black & Decker drill, that's about it. That's why things never seem to work. Now, if you saw my DIY skills, I'd be a terrible surgeon. But that's how I see this film. Like, he is completely detached from this. Like, he doesn't, you even see him. You see him in the hospital, and his attention to patients in the hospital is crap as well.
Well, he lies to them. I mean,
Yeah.
he transparently says, he keeps saying this thing throughout the movie of sort of like, trust me, right? Like, he asks people to trust. It's like, faites confiance à moi, sort of something like that. Like, have confidence in me. Sort of some expression like that. And clearly he's saying that in circumstances in which he knows the patient's going to die.
And one of them's a young boy.
Yeah.
He gives him the lollipop, and then he blatantly, and he looks at the mother, and the mother's going like, I've got hope. And there's no, of course, no, you're completely right. You keep hope. It's as you just said. He just says to her, well, you just have faith in me. And then he walks out, and Jacques confronts him.
Yeah.
Because he confronts him. He says, you just basically, you just lied to them. Like, that kid's gonna die.
Mm-hmm.
And but without even saying anything, he just says, he said, what's it to Jacques? He says, what's your diagnosis? Is it not your diagnosis as well? And Jacques clearly doesn't want to say anything. He says, exactly, and just walks off.
Right. Yeah.
Completely.
It's like, we both know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
But he doesn't address what he said. He doesn't address giving the mother hope. He doesn't address, wanting to be treated like a god, even though he knows he's a god who is set up for failure.
But again, it wonders to me, like, talking about this now, one of the things it brings to my mind is things like the Tuskegee experiment. When they gave those, they found those or gave syphilis to that group of African American men in the 30s, and then watched them suffer with it for decades. This feels very similar. Like, that young boy, he's like, oh no, we know what's going to happen to him, but I'm going to let it play out so I can continue to take notes, and then so I can for further whatever. Like, he uses, this is his kingdom. As we've said, this hospital and this house is a bubble. It's his kingdom, and he rules it. And if he feels that you are useful to his experimentation, then you get to stay. If you're not, then you get to walk through those double doors, and you are no longer his responsibility.
Yeah. No, I quite like that isolation on that line, right? Like, and it's interesting. I mean, I like the idea that maybe he would, keep the survival, the women who survive, like in those dog cages or something, waiting to transplant their hands. I mean, it's horrifying, but I don't know how to logically refute that he would do something like that. But yeah, go ahead.
How far away are we from Eyes Without a Face to the Human Centipede? That's all I'm saying.
I'm not sure that is the credit that the Eyes Without a Face wants on its list of influences. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think about how, like, I know some people, who work in medicine and are nurses and, have struggled with COVID and everything. And I know people, just like people who work in policing and who are dispatchers and all of this. You see messed up stuff. All of those people I know, like, you've got to say the right things. But the second you're out of the room, it's like, you're making morbid jokes about that kid dying. You know, I mean, you visited the scene of a suicide. The mom is crying. You say the right things, and then you leave and you make a joke about the brains on the wall looking like,
mince.
Yeah, like impressionist painting or something.
Yeah.
I mean, and you do that to survive, right?
Mm.
Because you're seeing horrible things. So there is this way in which like that bedside manner or that flat affect like reflects something about the medical profession or about these kinds of professions, but at the same time is truly horrifying in this particular character, given and goes beyond that. So I found that interesting too. And obviously, how terrifying is it to think, like, we think of scenarios in which, like, we're a prisoner of war, right? And we're being tortured or something, right? That's terrifying, right? You can't kill yourself and you're just kind of stuck here. How terrifying is it that like a doctor has cut off your face and doesn't seem to have any interest in you? And that's just, it's like, hey, look, nothing personal. You're just my daughter's type.
Yeah. There's a film that goes very different to this from the 70s. I think it's 72, 73, called Scream and Scream Again, and it has a lineage to this, I suppose, in many ways. It's got my boy Vincent Price in it, but there's a moment in that. The part of the film is there's a jogger. This guy's a runner. And he gets kidnapped. He gets abducted, and he wakes up in a hospital bed. And he only ever sees this nurse, and he's being used like for this experimentation by this doctor, played by Vincent Price. But the fact is, when he wakes up, like one of his legs is gone, and then when he wakes up again, like another one of his legs is gone. And you never really talk to this guy. Like he's not a character in the film. Like they don't spend time with him. And part of the horror is this fact that he is just a source of materials. And as you say, this this idea of sort of the prisoner of war, or sort of, he is nothing more than a resource in this film, and it's that the same arrogance of doctors of like, well, no, I'm doing the greater good, and again, it's this. She feels the same, like when you sort of watch Christiane, it's that thing of like, yes, I'm watching your personal story, and it's completely understandable as to why you flip at the end, as we said, like on impulse or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that it's almost like, is this her story? Like, or are we watching the father's story? Like, they seem to. I think they get equal screen time in that way. Like, it's clear it's her. Yeah. In other eventualities or other versions of this, there would be that triggering event that brings in the police, and it's obviously the bodies that do that. But like. She is the key character, and you sort of introduced to her, and she's obviously the last girl, whatever you want to call the final girl, if you want to call her that. But like you say, is it really her story, or is this the end of the father's story? Because you don't get an epilogue for her. You don't get a resolution for her story.
Me too.
But you obviously get a resolution of his story. He gets turned into pedigree chum. So. I don't know, but that's what I kind of enjoy about this film again, is like the ambiguity of like, well, whose story are we really following in this scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Christiane feels like the main character in the sense that she has emotions, right? I mean, she calls Jacques, she cries, and clearly, in the novel, the father was the main character. Right. And so that was changed for this film. And I think you're right that they sort of have equivalent screen time. I think that we're moved more by Christiane because we can identify with her more. He doesn't even get to say, well, it's unfortunate that we've got to kill these girls, but even that is denied him. And even his build is strange. I mean, he just seems like, I mean, if he were a gay man, he'd be a bear. That's all I can say. You know, like he's not. There's nothing like he doesn't seem like a stereotypical doctor, like kind of like tall, thin, maybe works out occasionally. No, he's just like a normal everyday guy who is terrifying in what he's doing and in no other way.
Yeah, exactly. It's that sort of. It's the horror that sits beneath the banality of life, isn't it? Sort of like, everyone looks fine. on the surface, you know, for the most part. Yeah, but, you know, again, if you really, really wanted to, and I'm supposed, you know, now I'm going to say this, and I'll probably sound like a pretentious prat saying it, but like, you know, you see the mask that he wears, you know, when he, or at least attempts to wear in the hospital by that bedside manner, the civility that he gives people, yet he is in private, you know, he knows that this needs to be hidden because he knows it's wrong. So the mask of civility sits on there just as Christiane has to wear the mask to hide her face. You could make those comparisons. I'm sure there has been an essay or two about that.
Sure.
But,
yeah. That's a good point. I mean, and that same, you know, Patrick Bateman talks about that same thing, the mask, you know, and presenting how, and, you know, we all do it, right? I mean, you know, I don't talk on the show about the way I cut off faces, you know,
the collection that you have on the,
no, when they remove that face, I mean, it's like something out of Preacher, right? There's, you know, where they remove that face and you actually see it coming off, and you're like, there's something horrible about the severed face, right? Where it's rendered flat and the features kind of disappear as it's removed. And I guess at this point it's like a trope, but I mean, this was doing it way before. But I think you're right. I mean, we all have some kind of face that we project to the public, right? And we all say the right things, you know. I mean, we try to, you know, you don't go to a funeral and talk to the person mourning and say, my balls itch. You know, I mean, you say, I'm sorry for your loss, you know, and you try to find the right words.
And then you rummage in your pockets, give your balls a scratch.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe you wait till you're in the car.
Yeah.
But I mean, and if you did that, you know, it's like you're the stranger or something. You're like the complete weirdo, which goes another direction from the doctor, which like maybe you're self-actualized, but everybody hates you, and the doctor is actually a psycho, but everybody loves him because he knows what to say.
Yeah, exactly. It's about that. It's about that. It's the sophistication, but also I think you say it's not just. It goes two ways, especially with the doctor, because it's not just he knows what to say. There was almost like an assumed authority and status because of his position. You say the police just take him at his word. Oh, he's a doctor. He owns this hotel, it's this hospital, so he must be a good person because he's a doctor. So we're going to take him at his word. And the same at the beginning of the film when he goes and claims the body or identifies the body of the woman. There's no challenge. Are you sure? Do you want to check anything? He's just like, that's my daughter, and I'm off. Like, and completely dispassionately, he just lifts up and goes, yeah, that's the one, and leaves. And I suppose there's just this assumed status that he's able to. They might even be like, they may even say like, he's a bit weird, that one, isn't he? He's a bit odd. But like, well, he's become a doctor, so he's clearly bright. That's, I don't know. It's like there's an assumed position that these people take, and that sort of carries some people through.
There's a modern day update of this in which he's black and he's caught in the first reel. Because the cops are just like, yeah, he is a doctor. On the other hand, I'm not sure that I trust him. But he has that privilege.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that privilege. Yeah, in the modern version, the film doesn't even happen because he gets pulled over for something else completely different and then shot. But there is definitely a privilege that goes with his position and sort of like his wealth, because it's clear that he's rich. Mm-hmm. They make a point saying that about how wealthy he is and he has status and this other stuff. So yeah, it's a clear point of privilege in this point of everyone sort of like they tread on eggshells. The police don't want to confront him. They want to send a girl in undercover.
They leave her dead, right?
Yes, they don't even bother following up on. But they feel fine because well, he says she's gone. She's not here.
It seems like they know everything, right? They have all the pieces to put this together. The one thing that they don't have is Louise, right? Because I guess the idea is that they assume that because the doctor has that patient, that he would just take her directly from the hospital. Yeah. And so the fact that the orderly says, oh, no, she was discharged. She left. I told her, where the bus picks you up. Okay. Good enough for us. They're missing Louise's role. Yeah. That's the one thing. And that's such a minor thing. It's like they have it all pieced together. They have everything they need to crack this case. And they just don't. They just can't quite see it.
Yeah, it's interesting, but again, that's real. If you know, how many times have there been police cases, real like true crime cases where you look back on them and they're like, yeah, they interviewed this person 12 times, and it wasn't until this one piece of evidence fell into place that they were like, oh no, that's definitely them. You know, in this country, I can think of loads. There's, like the Yorkshire Ripper through to, several recent ones, but. Yeah, so it feels real. There's something. Whilst this feels like a fairy tale, and it appears in that sort of like lyrical, poetic fashion, and is very pretty to look at. It's very beautifully shot. There is still an element of real people making cock-ups throughout all of this that result in the event or impulsive moments. It's just natural, and so yeah, it feels right, as you say. It feels right. Nothing feels contrived. It feels silly, but you just go, well, no, that sort of feels right. It all works.
Yeah, and I think that, it holds up remarkably well. I mean, I think, this is 1960. We're talking about 61 years ago.
Yeah.
And, while not a kind of like feminist manifesto or a dissection of elite white privilege, it has those elements and depicts those elements really well. Without making them be its primary thing. It is artistically, it's still shocking. It's, it's not as shocking post Saw and Hostel, but it certainly is shocking. It certainly is new. We're in a world of CGI, and it's black and white is still beautiful to us. That's saying a lot for a movie from 1960 whose reputation, the reputation of which has only increased. I mean, this movie gets more and more famous with each passing year.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think, well, on that point, then we'll make our sort of final points in a moment. If actually, I'll go first. Really, I think the final point is, you're right. This film, I was surprised, and I went in this with a Solaris cloud over the back of my head a little bit until I watched the trailer. I watched the trailer on YouTube and I thought, I'm going to do a bit of research on this beforehand, and I was like, this looks good. Like, this actually looks intriguing. That there's one thing I will say that we haven't talked about, which was a bit incongruous with it all, but I look forward to this to the extent that I bought the Blu-ray. I'm keeping the Blu-ray because the special features are good as well. It's a great film. And you're right. It hasn't aged badly. This is a really good film to watch. But more, there's a lot of things to say in this, and it's so influential. Like you said, we've talked about like John Carpenter, Patrick Bateman. There's all these things you can relate back to this. In the same year, you had Psycho, and everyone goes to Psycho as being this watershed moment, as I said, of being this thing where Hitchcock sort of broke the mold and invented the slasher and blah 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 blah. I'm not saying this film invented the torture porn film, but this film has got a huge amount of influence on later films, massively so, in the way it's shot, in the way that certain things happen. And so I really enjoyed it. Actually, I thought, the critics, I say, slammed it for its lackluster acting, but it's there for a purpose. It's one of those films you can watch and go, no, there is a point to how these people are being portrayed. Like, it's there for a purpose. It serves a purpose within the film, and they are deep, and there are meanings within this. And I will go back to this film. I've got no doubt I will go back to this film. It's really good. And there's so many themes to dig into this. I'm sure there's stuff that we haven't even touched yet. That there is things to talk about. And the shockingness of this film. The two things I will finally say is the shockingness of this film is raw. Like, that surgery, the face removing surgery. John Woo didn't do that in '97 in Face Off. Like, they show more in this film than you see of Nicolas Cage's raw face in that film. I'm telling you.
And we want to see Nick Cage's face removed.
Oh, yes.
Because he's Nick Cage.
Yeah. Hell, he's method. He'd have done it for real.
What was the incongruous thing?
The music.
Oh, yes.
So the music has
this carnival-esque sort of.
Yeah, it's very light and it's very carnival-esque, and it has almost like a comedic tone to it. And it just felt a little bit out of place continually, to the extent of it was not irritating, but I was a bit like, oh God, the score is a bit of an issue for me. Not enough to put me off because I really enjoyed it, but when it jumped in, it felt a little bit out of place. That was the only thing I'd really sort of harp on in this film, was the music.
Yeah, it's funny because the score is liked for this. Although I seem to remember reading that the same composer had done a similar score for a previous movie by the same director or something. But, it seems like, dude, this is a serial killer. Like, alter your style.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of the Carnivalesque as a sort of commentary on, the freakishness of lacking a face and, a bizarre juxtaposition. But, I do think that it lessens that title sequence, which, goes on quite a bit. And then it lessens when it comes in, it's just kind of like, yeah. And there is a moody music that's used for Christiane's sort of sad moments, but to make you get that she's sad. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The other thing is, as far as in terms of final thoughts, that this is a sort of like example of light sci-fi, right? This was very influential in especially in French horror history, that, there really hadn't been a lot of French horror movies. And so, I mean, talk about like a, nuclear bomb, like, wait, here's what we can do. But it's also like the thing that makes it sci-fi is it's still Victor Frankenstein. It's still a guy who is proposing organ transplants. And this is, 50 years before the first facial transplant, give or take. And we're doing this for real now. Like, it's actually really predictive. And many of those scientists doing facial transplants have been caught with disfigured daughters and dogs in cages. Just kidding. Okay, it's not predictive about that. But so it's light sci-fi. It's obviously sort of sci-fi horror kind of thing. It expands our sort of definition of what we're doing here, with sci-fi stuff. But it was a treat for me, and I'm super glad that you liked it, and it gives me an excuse to force you to watch Stalker.
Yeah, no, I will admit I'm kind of tempted by Stalker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
I think Solaris is slow.
Oh yeah, but the idea that I've read up on Stalker after Solaris, and the whole concept of it is fascinating. And so yeah, that maybe one will do.
Super influential. I mean, see, the only reason I haven't chosen it is I don't know how often I want to watch it next. Yeah. But I do have theories about what's going on in Stalker that I've talked with fans about.
It's a film I think we will do. I think we will definitely do it. I think I'd like to go do it. It's what I've learnt about the idea of the zone and taking people into it and all that kind of stuff. So we will get to that. But yeah, no, Eyes Without Face.
What's next week?
So next week we are jumping to the final frontier. We are taking on a new frontier. We are taking on Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Aren't we doing Bowie?
Oh Christ! Yeah, we're going to another one. I was about to jump. Yeah, we are going to Bowie. Of course we are. Before we get to Star Trek, we are going. Yeah, The Man Who Fell to Earth. Of course we are. I was getting all bit distracted. Yes, we've got David Bowie.
Classics, right?
Yeah.
One French, one American. But I mean, we're jumping a bunch of years. But these are two classics that we want to watch, that we've been aware of for a long time, and we're giving ourselves the excuse to watch them and talk to each other about it.
Yeah, I'm interested about it. The reason I chose The Man Who Fell to Earth, and we'll go on to the next show. But the reason I felt is because after David Bowie's death, The Man Who Fell to Earth and The Hunger got like a big push. It was like, these are not Labyrinth, because everyone always loved Labyrinth, but they were like, oh, these are his lesser known films. Go check these out. And I've seen The Hunger, and it's all right, it's fine, yeah. But this is one I haven't seen, and it's one of those ones again that, as you say, is sort of like I don't think gets talked about enough, from what I understand, and seems to be very divisive as well. So I'm really intrigued to watch this. Never seen it, I've got it ready, waiting. But I'm really looking forward to trying this one out before we do get into a load of mainstream things. So we're really starting with some obscure stuff and then going to get into some more mainstream things. But yeah,
I love that mix. I'm just mad that they didn't mention in the same breath Zoolander, which is Bowie's finest performance.
it is. Yeah, we'll get out. We'll do the whole back catalogue of Bowie films. But yes, no, I'm looking forward to doing that as well. Actually, also based on a novel. I forgot because this was based on a novel. Yeah, also based on a novel. Not going to read it, if I'm perfectly honest. Mainly because at the moment I'm reading I'm preparing. But I'm preparing for another film coming up. I am currently reading the novelization of Buckaroo Banzai, Adventures Across the Eighth Dimension.
You are a brave man.
I am. Yeah, I am. It's good, though. It's quite good fun, actually. And it's answering some questions. I may even be able to tell you. You've never seen it, so you wouldn't know what this means. But I may even be able to tell you where the watermelon is going. Or what it's for, at least. So that may make sense when we talk about it. So anyway, Julian, thank you very much for introducing me to Eyes Without a Face. That's
my pleasure.
I've really enjoyed this film and good talking about it as well. So thanks very much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to tell us more about what you think about this film or any other film that we've talked about or have coming up, you can find us online. We're usually on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. Come find us on there. Happy to talk about anything. You can email us. We are part of the 20th Century Geek Media franchise, kingdom, empire that will be built. You can email us it's at 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. And if you really like what we're doing and you love what me and Julian are giving you on this podcast, go and check out the Patreon. It's patreon.com/20 CG Media. That's 20th Century Geek Media, so CG Media. And there's all kinds of layers or levels or whatever they call them on the Patreon. But on two of them, you will get a weekly podcast, and it's me and Julian working our way through the original Twilight Zone series, the Rod Serling Twilight Zone series. And it's been an absolute blast doing that. We've done a whole bunch. So, so they're there. So go check those out. It's really cool. And but yeah, as usual, Julian, thank you very much. And
my pleasure.
We shall talk on the next episode.